Hello everyone. Let's review the result for October's 3-card blind main event tournament. This month we had 303 participants, 52 of which were new players to the event. If you're a new player watching this video, thanks for trying out the format. This month there were 200 unique decks submitted to the event, which as a percent of the whole is a lower number of unique decks than we usually see. That being said, if we weigh each card in these decks by their performance and run them through the Simpsons Diversity Index, you will see the drop in meta diversity was not nearly as large as the drop in the number of unique decks relative to the prior month. The 3-card blind diversity grade for October was a B. Alright, this was a particularly exciting month, so there is a lot to cover. To begin, we saw 2 powerful and recently unbanned cards reintroduced to the format. Wasteland in particular was massively influential on this meta. It was the most popular card this month, and its ability to destroy non-basic lands significantly influenced what types of decks players chose to use this month. We also saw some very powerful new cards from Duskmourn make their first appearance in this format. Because players tend not to have cards in their library, Unwanted Remake is nearly unconditional removal at 1 mana. Because Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares are already on the ban list for being cards that have overperformed in the past, it's not surprising that many players saw Unwanted Remake as a potentially very powerful card to play with or around. I think many players anticipating Unwanted Remake turned to Sleep Curse Fairy, which explains why it is the 4th most popular card this month, which is substantially more popular than it has been historically. Despite being clearly powerful in the context of this format, Unwanted Remake had a rather lukewarm first month in the format, in part because of Sleep Curse Fairy, but I believe another driver for this was another powerful new card from Duskmourn, which was Unstoppable Slasher. Finally, I think it's worth mentioning that the most popular deck this month was Chancellor of the Forge, Foil, and Island, which is a deck we've seen many times in the past, but this month it was resistant to Wasteland and also had an edge against Unstoppable Slasher, which made it positioned very well into this meta. And with that all having been covered, let's jump into discussing our winners for this month. Let's start by covering a clear trend in our winners, which was Hexdrinker plus Wasteland. Hexdrinker has been a strong and popular 1-drop in this format for a long time, but it's unique in its ability to leverage Wasteland beyond what other 1-drops are capable of. For many 1-drops, including Wasteland in your deck means that you're going to have a dead card in the event that your opponent isn't running any non-basic lands. For Hexdrinker though, in matches where your opponent doesn't have non-basic lands, Wasteland is an extra mana source for you to level up your Hexdrinker at a faster rate. In Aspirant 4, we had Dreadlow playing Forest, Hexdrinker, and Wasteland, and in Aspirant 3, we had Andruoff playing the same deck. In Contender 6, Quarion was playing a very similar list, which was Hexdrinker, Mox Emerald, Wasteland, and in Contender 4, Circle was playing the same deck. There was one more deck that won its pod using Wasteland, which was Tarvis in Aspirant 2, who was using Chancellor of the Forge, Pyrokinesis, and Wasteland. Between its free-to-cast removal spell and the ability to blow up non-basic lands, this deck covers a lot of ground in terms of countering the opponent's game plan. In Aspirant 1, Trunkle was using a similar deck, which was Chancellor of the Forge, Fury, and Mercadian Bazaar. This deck isn't as controlling as the former one, but because it uses a storage land, it can fall back on huge haymakers in the event that the game runs long enough that you can cast Fury or Chancellor of the Forge for their full costs. Alright, let's cover the white 2-drop piles that we saw win pods this month, beginning with Fluid Wi-Fi and Novice 3, who was playing Mishra's Factory, Mox Pearl, and Prairie Dog. There really isn't that much to say about this list, it's just good cards. It turns out while you're in Novice League, that is enough to win pods. In a similar tone, we saw Aqual win Novice 2 with Ajani Nakatl Pariah, Divine Gambit, and Remote Farm. A strong white 2-drop paired with a versatile piece of removal tends to be a recipe for success. And it's a recipe for success that brought Aurora Veil to a win in Contender 5 using Remote Farm, Skrelv's Hive, and Soul Partition. I think that we can also mention here that the 2nd and 3rd place runner-ups in Contender 5 were extremely similar. Box of Joe was playing Prairie Dog, Remote Farm, and Soul Partition, and Golden Dracon was playing Divine Gambit, Prairie Dog, and Remote Farm. I think this helps demonstrate how strong this particular archetype is, as well as how very small changes to these lists can determine which variation comes out on top. In Contender 3, our winner was Krujok, who was playing Curse of Silence, Hex Drinker, and Undiscovered Paradise. With Thoughtseize being on the ban list, players are continuing to explore what alternatives exist for turn 1 hand attack. With Wasteland being legal, players were more cautious around using storage lands, which makes Curse of Silence more appealing in this particular month than something like Dreams of Steel and Oil might be. Azath must have come to a similar conclusion and won Contender 1 with another Curse of Silence deck, which was Crawling Chorus, Curse of Silence, and Plains. Maybe I'm just being a hater here, or perhaps I'm completely wrong in general, but I think Crawling Chorus in the grand scheme of things is a rather weak 1-drop, which helps highlight just how strong Curse of Silence really is. In Contender 2, we had a tie between Frugal Monkey and Ice Numbers, who were both playing Daze, Island, and Sleep Cursed Fairy. This deck had the advantage of not having any issues dealing with Wasteland, and it is resistant to most forms of removal, including the brand new Unwanted Remake. And of course, I've saved the most exciting and interesting for last. In Novice 1, we saw Kermunism, and in Exemplar, we saw Trickpa, both playing the same deck to great success. This deck was Gleeful Demolition, Serene Remembrance, and Slagwood's Bridge. This was an unexpected deck to see win pods, especially in Exemplar League. This isn't the first time we've seen this deck submitted to the main event. Trickpa actually submitted this same deck back in July. Since then, the deck has largely flown under the radar and has been dismissed as niche at best. But within the context of this month, the deck was uniquely positioned to overwhelm almost every popular strategy. This has ultimately led to Trickpa claiming the champion title with a 1942 ELO rating. And with that, I'd like to say congratulations to our winners one more time, and move into discussing the cards that will be included in this month's ban vote. Let's begin by discussing Wasteland, which was an absolutely no-brainer include for this vote. As a recently unbanned card with a respectable performance, it was an auto-include on this list anyways, but it was also the most popular card this month and had a profound effect on the meta, in addition to having 5 pod wins. Despite all of this, I thought this meta was healthy and interesting, so I think you could make the case that this card being around for another month could lead to some interesting outcomes, but there's no question it belongs on this vote. Next we have Nezumi Shortfang, which is similarly here because it was a recently unbanned card that had a respectable performance. It was the 12th most popular card this month, and it did perform reasonably well at lower elos. I think for a card that was recently unbanned, this is about as healthy of a performance as we could ask for, but including the card on this list will allow folks in the community to provide a rebuttal to its recent unban if they feel differently. Next we have our most controversial inclusion on this list, which is Chancellor of the Forge. It is unquestionably an incredibly powerful card with a long history in this format, and this month it was the 3rd most popular card with a very strong average score of 60%. This is not the first time we've voted on Chancellor of the Forge in the history of this format, and we're once again voting on it as opposed to Foil, which is the other card that it's frequently paired with and often part of the reason why we discuss Chancellor of the Forge in reference to bans. Foil is undoubtedly a very powerful card and a big driver for why Chancellor of the Forge is included in this list. That being said, 2 of our pod wins this month were using Chancellor of the Forge to power other pitch to cast cards like Fury and Pyrokinesis, which similarly to Foil have been a big part of the 3-card blind format for a long time. Rather than looking at Foil, Fury, and Pyrokinesis separately as cards that might continue to be problematic, it makes more sense to just cut them off at the source and vote on Chancellor of the Forge itself. Next up we have Curse of Silence, which claimed 2 pod wins this month and exists in a similar space as some other recently banned cards like Thoughtseize and Anointed Peacekeeper. Curse of Silence follows a similar play pattern to these banned cards, where including this card in your deck leaves you with a comfortably high floor for average performance because you tend to win most games where you take the first turn. That being said, for a card that promises such a consistent and strong average performance, it has a shockingly high ability to completely stomp out pods and win them entirely. Based on its performance this month and its characteristics that are in common with cards that are already on the ban list, it does make sense to include this in the vote. And the final card that we're voting on this month is Hex Drinker, which was the 6th most popular card this month, and it claimed 5 pod wins. Hex Drinker has been a core part of this format for the majority of the time that we've run these events. It is a consistently strong performer and one of the better 1-drops in the format right now. That being said, I do think it is important to mention here that part of Hex Drinker's strong performance this month was due to its unique synergy in combination with Wasteland. Being able to leverage it as an additional mana source in matches where it would otherwise be a dead card. Having acknowledged this, I still think it's an appropriate card to include on this vote because its long tenure in the format has led to it becoming rather stale. I'm optimistic that a Hex Drinker ban could lead to a more diverse cast of 1-drops being used in the main event. And that concludes the list of cards that we will be voting on this month to determine whether they will remain legal next month. Don't forget to cast your vote, which you can do by visiting the 3-Card Blind website, which will be linked in the description of this video. And that just about wraps up the month of October. Thank you again to all of you who have participated, and I'm hoping to see you again next month. Thanks for watching, everyone, and see you soon.